If I may be so kind enough to ask all of you to take your seats. We now see our distinguished chief guest and orator for this evening, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, being welcomed by Project Chairman for Olcott Oration 2023, Mr. Asanga Priyadarshana, together with his wife, being welcomed by the head prefect of our school, Tevin Silva. Having been received at the entrance to Ananda, they will now be welcomed to the Madhamidula of our school, followed by the Candian dancers being taken. Led them to the Olcott statue to pay tribute. The Kandyan dancers will now pave the way for our distinguished orator this evening. Together with our principal, Mr. Lal Disanaika, and Executive President of the Ananda College Old Boys Association, Professor Atula Kularatne, to the statue of Colonel Henry Steele Olcott to pay tribute as our founder of Ananda. Following the paying of homage to our founder, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, our distinguished invitees will now be welcomed into the PDS Kularatne Auditorium. And as always, we'll begin this evening's proceedings with the traditional lighting of the oil lamp. And for the lighting, ladies and gentlemen, we'd first like to have our orator and distinguished chief guest this evening, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, Principal Mr. Lal Disanaika, Executive President of the Ananda College Old Boys Association, Professor Atula Kularatne, Joint Secretaries, Mr. Yasas Randunu and Mr. Dinuka Chandrakirti, Project Chairman, Mr. Asanga Priyadarshana, Treasurer, Mr. Praveen Ruberu, Immediate Past President, Mr. Bimal Vijay Singha, and the past presidents, Mr. Dushmanta Karanaguda, Mr. Asoka Karnaratna, Mr. Lalit Sena Nayaka, Deputy Principals, Mr. Randika Pereira and Mr. Sugit Maduranga, and finally, the Head Prefect of Ananda College, Tevin Silva. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to welcome our distinguished invitees inside the Kularatne Auditorium, as we would like to begin this evening's proceedings for the Olcott Oration 2023 in a moment's time. I'd now like to invite our distinguished chief guest, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, our orator, onto the stage, together with Principal Mr. Lal Disanayake, the Executive President of the Ananda College Old Boys Association, Professor Kularatne, together with Project Chairman for Olcott Oration 2023, Mr. Asanga Priyadarshana, to come up on stage and take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, may I please ask you to remain standing, as we'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the presence of all those who are joining with us this evening via our virtual channels, and all those who are joining with us this evening from our virtual channels globally, on our Ananda College Old Boys Association YouTube channel and Facebook. Thank you very much for joining with us. And as we like to begin this evening's proceedings, may I now ask all of you to remain standing for the national and college anthems. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you to remain standing as we'd like to pay respect to all the gallant war heroes who have sacrificed their lives for our nation, for the freedom of our country, by joining me in paying respect to them with 1 minute silence. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. But before you take your seats, may I now invite Venerable Marasana Dhammananda Thera to invoke the blessings of the Noble Triple Gem upon us.
පන්සිල් සමාදන් වීම සඳහා දෑත් නැල්ල තබාගෙන තුන් වතාවක් නමස්කාරය කියන්න. බුද්ධං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි ධම්මං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි සංඝං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි ဒုတိယံ පි බුද්ධං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි ဒုတိယံ පි ධම්මං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි ဒုတိယံ පි සංඝං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි တတိယံ පි බුද්ධං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි တတိယံ පි ධම්මං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි တတိယံ පි සංඝං සරණං ගච්ඡාමි පාණාති පාතා වේරමණී සික්ඛාපදං සමාදියාමි อดินนาดานาเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิกาเมสุมิจฉาจาราเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิมุสาวาดาเวรมณีสิกขาปดังสมาธิยามิ සුරාමේරය මජ්ජපමා දට්ඨානා වේරමණී සික්ඛාපදං සමාදියාමි. ඔබගේ සියලු කටයුතු සර්ව ප්‍රකාරයෙන්ම සාර්ථක වේවා කියන දහසින් ආශිර්වාද ගාතාව කියනවා. සබ්බීතියෝ විවජ්ජහන්තෝ සබ්බ රෝගෝ විනස්සතු මාතේ භවත්වන්තරායෝ සුඛී දීඝායුකෝ භව භවතු සබ්බ මංගලං රක්ඛන්තු සබ්බ දේවතා සබ්බ බුද්ධානුභාවේන සබ්බ ධම්මානුභාවේන සබ්බ සංඝානුභාවේන සදා සොත්ති භවන්තු තේ. ඔබ සමනට තෙරුවන් සරණයි.
Mage namaskar purva stutiya oba wahanseta. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now take your seats.
Colonel Henry Steele Olcott is an important Sri Lankan national hero and is perhaps the most important of such heroes who was born overseas. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott was born in 1832 in the United States. A journalist and a lawyer, Colonel Olcott achieved early distinction as an officer in the U.S. Army during the American Civil War, which was fought from 1861 to 1865, achieving emancipation of the slaves in the United States. He served in several important military and governmental roles in the course of his career. The Panadura Vadaya, or the Panadura debate, was instrumental in Colonel Olcott visiting Sri Lanka. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875, along with Miss Helena Blavatsky and others. They transferred the headquarters of the society to India in 1878. Colonel Olcott and Miss Blavatsky reached Colombo in 1880 and observed the Panchasila upon their arrival. At a time when the practice of Buddhism in the country was under serious threat, Colonel Olcott, along with his colleagues, instituted important measures to stem the deadline. The establishment of a network of Buddhist schools under the Buddhist Theosophical Society was of paramount importance. The network of schools include Ananda College, Colombo, Dharmaraja College, Kandy, and Mahendra College, Gaul. The Buddhist Theosophical Society schools had an uphill battle to fight for a long time, having to compete against the well-established missionary and British-controlled educational institutions of the time, whilst receiving no support from the establishment. However, the Buddhist schools established under the Buddhist Theosophical Society thrived, while also being a foundational element, the Buddhist revival in Sri Lanka. The Buddhist revival, in turn, was of paramount importance in the success of the independence movement. Colonel Olcott passed away in 1907 in Adyar, Chennai. The Buddhist revival in Sri Lanka played an important role in Buddhism, continuing to thrive in Sri Lanka despite many challenges, while also contributing substantially to the realization of independence for the country. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott played a very important role in the Buddhist revival. He is one of Sri Lanka's most important heroes and should be recognized as a key figure in the strengthening of Buddhism worldwide. Such was his enduring influence.
I would now like to invite our distinguished head table to join me in paying homage to our founders. Firstly, may I now invite our chief guest and distinguished orator for this evening, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, to pay homage to our founder, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, together with our principal, Mr. Lal Disanayaka, to garland the portrait of Venerable Hikkaduwe Sri Sumangala Thera, and our executive president of the Ananda College Old Boys Association, Professor Atula Kularatne, to garland the portrait of Venerable Migettuwatte Gunananda Thera. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You may now take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to ask you all to direct your attention onto the LED screen, as this is a glimpse into the history of Olcott Oration. A glorious history of our distinguished, dignified orators to have taken upon the stage and mantle of delivering the keynote address at every year's Olcott Oration, ladies and gentlemen. We'd also like to recognize the presence of Member of Parliament, Mr. Iran Vikramaratne, together with his wife, and Governor of the Central Bank, Mr. Nandalal Veerasinghe. Thank you very much for being here with us this evening. To begin this evening's formal proceedings, may I now invite the President of the Ananda College Old Boys Association, Professor Atula Kularatne.
Very good evening to all of you. Principal of Ananda College, Mr. DMLP Disanayaka, Deputy Principals, Assistant Principals, past and present teachers, orator for today, distinguished Professor Buddhima Indraratna, past presidents, members of the Management Committee, Executive Committee, and members of the Ananda College Old Boys Association, members of the School Development Society, presidents, secretaries, and members of the affiliated groups, members of the Parliament, past orators, ambassadors, students, distinguished invitees, and all the attendees via virtual platforms, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I welcome all of you to the Olcott Oration 2023, organized by the Ananda College All Boys Association. I take this opportunity to welcome and thank distinguished Professor Buddhima Indraratna for accepting our invitation to deliver the prestigious Olcott Oration 2023. I wish to welcome Ms. Indraratna and the family members as well. On Monday, 1st November 1886, the Buddhist English School, PETA, was officially established at number 61 Melbourne Street, PETA, as the first regular English school organized by the Buddhists. This became a reality after the arrival of then 48-year-old Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, who was inspired by reading a booklet titled Buddhism and Christianity in Discussion Face to Face, which gave an account of Panadura debate or Panadura Avadaya, which was held in 1873. Colonel Olcott, who was an American, arrived in then Ceylon in May 1880 and became a Buddhist within few days after his arrival. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott was able to flock together the leaders of Buddhist revival at that time, Venerable Hikkaduwe Sri Sumangala Thero, Migettuwatte Gunananda Thero, Anagarika Dharmapala, and many other leaders to establish Ananda College in 1886 with 37 students. Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, a name etched in the annals of history, stands as a beacon of inspiration for his instrumental role in inception of Ananda College and the resurgence of Buddhist education in our nation. His passing on 17th February 1907 at the age of 75 years marked the end of an era, but his legacy endured. His vision and dedication laid the foundation for Ananda College to flourish, becoming a nurturing ground for scholars, leaders, and missionaries. Ananda College's journey from its humble beginnings to its current status as a premier Buddhist educational institution in Sri Lanka is truly remarkable. Since its inception in 1886, Ananda College has not merely been an educational establishment, but a nurturing ground for leaders, visionaries, and individuals committed to the betterment of our motherland. Its contributions span far beyond the walls of classrooms and textbooks. Ananda College's resilience through challenging times and its role in nurturing leaders in various periods of history speaks volumes about its significance. Moreover, this esteemed institution has remained unwavering in its commitment to the core values of compassion, tolerance, and social responsibility, instilling these virtues in generations of students. It has been a driving force in cultivating not just intellectual prowess, but also a sense of civic duty and ethical leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in debt to the founders of this great institution, and we are gathered here today to pay tribute to all who work selflessly for Buddhist revival through education. Let us honor the memory of Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, a visionary whose indomitable spirit and unwavering commitment continue to inspire us to strive for excellence and serve our nation. May his legacy serve as a guiding light, reminding us of the transformative power of education and the enduring impact of one individual's dedication to a noble cause. Before I end, I would like to thank the Vice President, Mr. Asanga Priyadarshan, and his team for their efforts in organizing the Olcott Oration this year. Congratulations to Asanga and your team for a job well done. Once again, I wish to welcome all of you present here and all our live stream viewers. Thank you for joining to respect our founders. May the blessings of Mother Ananda shower upon all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kularatne. Ladies and gentlemen, how does one change the world? This is the very question I will pose for you this evening as I once again extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the 2023 Olcott Oration organized by the Older Boys Association in celebration of our Founders' Day. I am Buddhima Indraratna and I will be your MC this evening. In retrospect of what has taken place in the then Ceylon, our nation, our island, was on the cusp of losing itself. More importantly, we, as its people, were on the verge of losing our identity. In this quest to cement an identity for ourselves, Ananda was the nucleus of change that laid the foundation for a stronger vision that came into being through Colonel Henry Steele Olcott. His ideals, his vision, his devotion to the cause of protecting Buddhism and promoting Buddhist education in the then Ceylon was the change that citizens in a country ravaged by confusion and misdirection needed. It was no sense of patriotism that motivated an American to fight for this island nation, but a sense of belonging and attachment that he had for the culture, the heritage, and the beautiful people of this island. The subsequent battles that were fought by the likes of Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, Venerable Hikkadwe Sri Sumangala Thera, Migettuwatte Gunananda Thera, Anagarika Dharmapala, were to instill this identity in our people. In 1948, as we celebrated our independence, and in 2024, as we will be celebrating 76 years since independence, we must ask ourselves, Is this what our ancestors wanted for our country? Ladies and gentlemen, the change that was instigated by Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, taking a small step under a tiny roof at 61 Malibon Street in Petta, is a testament to the belief that he instilled in this vessel, Ananda. If Ananda was at the heart of protecting Buddhism and fighting for our country, our identity, Ananda still has the potential to lead the same sort of revival in today's context. And just as much as it took one man to make this difference, to bring together a nation to fight for one cause, it could be one of us. It could only take one of us to take that first step towards building a better Sri Lanka, a better nation for all, a nation that our ancestors intended for us to have. And I believe that if we are to give such a nation to our children, our children's children, we must start today, not tomorrow, today. If we take it upon ourselves to make a small difference in someone's life, we give them hope, belief of a better life, a better world. And it is this belief that brings people together. One common belief to make Sri Lanka better. And this change, it could very well start right here at Ananda. So how does one change the world, ladies and gentlemen? Belief. One small step today could make a significant difference for years to come. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we'd now like to begin this evening's proceedings. I would now like to invite Mr. Mudita Dayaratna, distinguished old Anandian, to introduce to you the orator for this evening.
Mr. Principal, Mr. Disanayaka, the Vice Principals and the past and present academic staff of Ananda, Executive President of the OBA, Professor Atula Kularatne, the members of the Management Committee and the Executive Committee, distinguished invitees, past orators, fellow Anandians, ladies and gentlemen. We take the Olcott Oration to serve another purpose, that is to recognize a distinguished Anandian who has achieved a great height towards development of humanity and the world. With that note, it is my very pleasant responsibility to introduce today's orator. To begin with, what I would do is I would run a sketch through of his achievements. To start with the achievements, I would put it in a different way, that our distinguished orator is a collector of many things. Starting with stamps, of course, that also he has a top shelf collection. Expensive branded watches, koi cup. Those are only little collections. The main collections are his academic achievements and his service towards education. When you talk of his service towards education, you would come across that in the field of civil engineering, he is a distinguished professor, a director of Transport Research Centre at the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, honorary distinguished professor of 5 international universities: the Asian Institute of Technology, Thailand, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati, Shanghai University for Science and Technology, Beijing Transportation University, and Herborn Institute of Technology, China. That is why I said he's a collector. He starts collecting and the list goes on. For him to be qualified to address us today for this prestigious oration, he has to be an Anandian. So he is an Anandian, he is a distinguished Anandian, and our good professor starts his schooling career at Royal, year 1, and then of course his parents decides to bring him to Ananda. And from year 2 onwards, he has been a thoroughbred Anandian. There is a greater reason for that. His mother, late Dr. Swarna Dimel Indraratna, is an old girl of Ananda College. She entered medical college from Ananda. And of course, his uncle, a very distinguished civil engineer, engineer Dhanaratna, who is actually now the president of the OBA in Britain, who is also present today, right? All these reasons, and of course, his elder brother, Dr. Kanishka, was already a full-fledged Anandian. So all these reasons were attributed to bring Professor to Ananda. And his school career was a very balanced one. He was very good in his studies, obviously, and on top of that was an all-rounder. He was there in the athletics team, played a bit of table tennis, swimming. Of course, at those days we did not have a swimming pool, but still he did swimming, right? And music, right? We have, using Buddhima, we have got away with on many occasions, because when there were presentations required, it was only to tell him, okay, why don't you play some pop music? And the matter was sorted out. So with his GCE O-level excellent results, he gains the Lord Mountbatten Commonwealth Scholarship sponsored through the British Council in 1977 and leaves to England. And that's the first time we heard the word international baccalaureate, right, in 1977. And then what transpires is a very active university career. With his excellent performance at the British High School, he gets a scholarship funding to start civil engineering degree at Imperial College London, right? After graduation, what happens is that achievement, when he starts that, and in 1984, he embarks on a master's degree, or double master's degree. Now with this double master's degree, before he comes to this double master's degree, our professor gets local experience, industrial experience, both in England as well as in Sri Lanka. He was involved in the Kotmale Dam project, and that is where he got an idea about the soil stability and what are the practical reasons which are going to take place. So with that in mind, he comes into doing a master's degree or a double master's degree, right? And that double master's degree, when he was doing that in 1984, he realized that ground conditions were not ideal for a lasting bond. So while up in the sky, 33,000 feet or 35,000 feet up in the sky, he set his eyes upon his life partner, right? And, of course, completed his double masters and pursued for his PhD in Alberta, Canada. And completing his PhD in 1987, and also now he needed stability. He was talking about stability, so he got married in 87 to Manori, who's here with us today. And together, they have parented 3 lovely young men, all professionals in their own right, a cardiologist, a medical researcher, and a psychologist, doing their own professional work and excelling in their selected fields. Now, when he came here, he with his work in 1987 completing, he joined Geomechanics Center in Sudbury and some of the world's deep copper mines, several thousand feet below the surface. Then it was time to make a change. And the change came in a diagonal direction. From very cold climes, he comes to a hot, humid condition at Asian Institute of Technology, AIT, where he starts his academic career. Academic career, when he comes to that is again because the location is closer to Sri Lanka. That would have also been one reason for his decision to move into Thailand. And from Thailand, in 1991, he moves to Australia. That is after 3 years at AIT as an associate professor, where he trained many Sri Lankan students in research and geotechnical engineering. Then, after joining University of Wollongong, he proactively launched a research program in transport infrastructure and funded Australia's first formal research centre in railway engineering with government and industry funding. In 2015, our professor was appointed as the inaugural Distinguished Professor of Civil Engineering at the University of Wollongong. A distinguished professor means he's top shelf, right? The pinnacle of professional ranks. As I told you at the beginning, he's a collector. Now we start his collection, right? Professor Indraratna's contribution to geotechnical and railway engineering have been acknowledged through many national and international awards. And he was honored with many awards, but I'll start with the latest one, which he received this October, Professor Visvesvaraya Award for outstanding contribution to civil engineering outside the United Kingdom, awarded by the Institute of Civil Engineers, London. Now that was just last October. He flew up to England to collect that award. And from there onwards, let me put through the rest of the honors. Right? First, Ralph Proctor Award in 2016, and fourth, Louis Menard Award in 2017 by the International Society of Soil Mechanics and Geotechnical Engineering, which is the parent society in his field with over 22,000 members from 97 countries. He also delivered the 2009 E.H. Davis Memorial Lecture of Australian Geomechanics Society for outstanding contributions to theory and practice, and the 9th Stephen Maverich Lecture in 2021 at the Melbourne Arts Centre for his contribution to railway engineering. For his pioneering contributions, Professor received the 2009 Business and Higher Education Award hosted by the Australian Commonwealth Government, the Engineers Australia Transport Medal in 2011, and Australia-New Zealand Railway Technical Society Outstanding Individual Award in 2015. Other numerous international recognitions to date include the Thomas Telford Premium Award by the Institute of Civil Engineers, London, the Robert Quingley Commendation Award by the Canadian Geotechnical Society, the Eurasian University Medal, and the prestigious Medal for Excellence for Outstanding Contribution to Geotechnical Research and Teaching by International Association for Advances in Geomechanics in 2017. The last year, Professor was inducted as an honorary life member of the Australian Geomechanics Society for his lifetime contribution through higher education and research and selfless service to community. Only 17 Australians to date have received this honor over the years. Most recently this year, the professor was honored with the Best Publication Award given for an overseas engineer by the Institute of Civil Engineers, United Kingdom. That was this Sir Visvesvaraya Award, which he received recently. Professor's work in Sri Lanka should not be forgotten. He was UNDP consultant over a number of years, training engineers at the National Building Research Organization in Colombo in the late 1990s in the field of landslide mitigation, and was invited by the government of Sri Lanka for post-tsunami rehabilitation of the southern railway tracks. In early 2005, he volunteered his services and refused any payment offered by the government. His service through UNDP were recognized by late Prime Minister Madam Sirima Bandaranayake commendation via Ministry of Science and Technology in 2001. And in 2015, the Institute of Engineers Sri Lanka invited the professor to deliver the B.D. Rampala Memorial Lecture. Professor currently leads numerous projects worth over $2 million per year. He has been a geotechnical consultant to various infrastructure projects, and for example, Port of Brisbane reclamation and Port of Kembala Outer Harbour development in Australia, various railway roads and tunnel design and construction projects in the state of New South Wales in Australia, rail track improvement work in Saudi Arabia, and ground improvement and improvement at Second Bangkok international airport, and to date, again, he's collecting. He has published over 1,000 papers, academic papers, authored and co-authored nearly 15 books, nearly 500 journals, articles, and more than 70 keynote presentations in all the continents and amongst the most cited worldwide in his field of specialization. Ladies and gentlemen, he is considered among the first 10 specialists in his field in the world today. He has successfully supervised over 150 PhD and master's graduates and trained over 40 postdoctoral fellows. And out of that, a notable number have been Sri Lankans for the past 7 years. He has been the chair of the Ground Improvement Advisory Board and Institution of Civil Engineering UK and the chief editor of the International Journal of Ground Improvement. The professor was the first Sri Lankan engineer to be inducted as a fellow of the most prestigious Australian Academy of Technological Science and Engineering. He is also a fellow of the Institute of Engineers Australia, a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineering, fellow of the Geotechnical Society of UK, FGS, and most significantly, a fellow of the Institute of Engineers, Sri Lanka. He is a chartered engineer of 3 countries, Sri Lanka, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Now, this is real testament for his collections and achievements, and it gives me tremendous pleasure in inviting him for the keynote address. And before that, I would wish to make the foundation and show some relevance of his today's topic to Colonel Olcott and what we are commemorating today. In May 27, 1880, Colonel Olcott and Madame Blavatsky sets foot in then Ceylon from Galle Harbour. Now, when Colonel arrived in Galle, he had a rousing welcome, and there was this conversion to Buddhism by accepting the 5 precepts and the association of the Mahasangha. The next part of Colonel's journey was from Galle by road. He comes to Dodanduwa, Ambalangoda, Bentota, Payagala, and he comes to Kalutara. Now, this scenario I have extracted from Dr. Amunugama's book, The Lion Roar, Anagarika Dharampala and the Making of Modern Buddhism. In that, it comes in chapter 2, page 106, is where this narration of the journey of Colonel Olcott is said. Now from Kalutara, Colonel and Madame Blavatsky's journey is by train to Colombo. So with that, let me invite distinguished Professor Buddhima Indraratna to the podium to present his oration. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Principal of Ananda College, Mr. Disanayaka, President of OBA, and my good friend, Prof. Kularatne, and core members of the OBA, past and present staff and students of Ananda College, young prefects who are here, fellow Anandians, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Mudita Indraratna, my close friend since the primary school days, for that pretty lengthy and elaborate, certainly very detailed, and the longest introduction that I have listened to in recent times. It's indeed a great honor and privilege to be here at my alma mater to deliver the 2023 Henry Steele Olcott Oration. And my sincere thanks to the OBA for inviting me for this wonderful opportunity and to deliver a message which I hope will be profound enough for the engineers in particular who are in this audience. My topic today will be in the area of advances in sustainable transport infrastructure, which is crucial to Sri Lanka given the current socio-economic circumstances. And I will also define in my own way what is meant by sustainability, a term that is abused and misused more than being used. As a preamble to this technical discourse, I shall pay my sincere gratitude to some key facets drawn from a decade of my primary and secondary education at Ananda. We all know that the passion from the early stages hones one's careers, and success may culminate from key attributes acquired from the school days, such as discipline, commitment, and training. Indeed, it was at Ananda that I started to build on these attributes. I certainly dedicate this oration to my former teachers at Ananda, whose dedication to high-quality teaching created an inspirational learning environment that defined the initial path towards a technological career in my case. The list of teachers will be very long if I mention all of them, so I will curb the urge to name them all. But I must mention some teachers who have had an influence on my career in a technological sense. Mr. Upali Karunaratna, Mr. C.M. Veeraratna, Mr. S.D. Jarmosena, and Mr. Bandhu Kodikar in mathematics. Mr. Bandula Galapatti, Mr. Tissa Seniviratna, Mrs. Perdita Dias, and Mr. N.K.B. De Silva in physics and chemistry. I think it was an exceptional era at that time in education, under the exemplary leadership of Colonel G.W. Rajapaksa as the principal. Those were the days at Ananda that produced a mammoth number of engineering admission to two universities which had engineering at the time, Moratuwa and Peradeniya. It was a period of stellar performance, if not extraordinary. And I sincerely hope it's still the case today. In the past, some journalists have asked me about my role models. I think I should mention a few here. My late father was a very passionate and dedicated academic, and he has had an unwavering influence on my work ethics and discipline. He was also from Olcott School, Dharma Ashoka, Ambalangoda. My uncle, my father's youngest brother, is an Anandian, a civil engineer working in London at the time I was starting my tertiary education, and he had a natural intuition for bridge and road design. If I, in retrospect, look back, they were indeed my role models at different stages of my journey that had traversed 4 continents, from Asia to Europe, then to North America, and finally to Australia. I will now start my official technical discourse. And a lot has been said about the life and work of Colonel Henry Olcott, so I will not dwell too much on that. But there is something from Olcott's teaching and also Madame Blavatsky's teaching that had inspired me and that have carried on until today in the science and engineering outcomes that I've had over the last 4 decades in my career. No belief or faith is greater than the truth. This comes from adaptation of the original Hindu scripts Satyam nasti parodharma. Now, you will see why this is very important in engineering and science. Before I actually go to transport infrastructure, I will show you here the engineering and science cycle, which I introduced last year to the Transport Research Center, which I'm the head of as the director. If you look at the two top quadrants of this circle, evidence, what we call data, which is measurable, leads to theory, and theory is the truth. Engineering goes beyond that. Science would be the foundation of engineering, if I may put it in a very brief manner. But the theory has to be applied in a way that you need a tangible solution. In engineering, we'll call that design. The solutions have to be applied, and in engineering, we will call it construction. Make it happen. That's the application. Once the infrastructure is built, you have to monitor its performance. Is it stable? I think Mr. Mudita Indraratna said a few things about stability. Yes, that's indeed a buzzword. And the stability of infrastructure, you need to monitor. And then you get new data, which defines what we now call safety and reliability, which cannot be compromised in any community. Monitoring the performance leads to new data, new evidence, and that leads to the refinement of the truth. And the refinement of the truth leads to better solutions, better applications, better performance, and hence the engineering science cycle continues. And this applies to most academic fields as well as in practice. I would like to, as a preamble, suggest 5 key challenges that Sri Lanka will have in transport infrastructure at the present and into the future. The post-COVID budgets. We know how the world had suffered. In Sri Lanka, are the post-COVID budgets sufficient to create high-quality design and construction? Are we using shortcuts? What are engineers going to do if the budget is a shoestring budget? Can we still maintain the same design and construction philosophy? Are we going to compromise safety and comfort? Now, this is very important, and I will tell you why. If I were to give an analogy here, in terms of transport, people look at comfort before safety. Very, very few countries, they will put safety before comfort. In Sri Lanka, I know people are very concerned about comfort. If I ask this audience, how many of you still prefer to drive your own car knowing that you are going to get stuck in traffic for 1 hour? Would you use the public transport, Sri Lankan trains tomorrow? I don't think so, because you haven't developed the confidence to use public transport. But when you go shopping in Singapore or Hong Kong, or see your relatives in London or New York, you will be using public transport. You have no qualms about using underground trains in London. So if we were to improve safety culture in Sri Lanka, then there has to be some incentive, some encouragement for the community at large to use public transport. Public transport should be for everyone, not to the low income and middle income. It should be also for the high income people if we are going to reduce congestion in this country. Then coming to circular economy perspectives. What are we going to do with all the waste that we produce in this country? Rubber tires, glass, plastics. Sri Lanka is a small country, land is scarce. It's not like Australia where we still have plenty of land to have landfill and disposal sites. In Sri Lanka, the land is limited. It's already congested. So the circular economy is how we recycle this waste. It's a very important thing that you will all need to think about. This is not just for engineers and scientists. This is for everyone. Then people are talking about emerging technologies. It's a buzzword these days, EV, autonomous vehicles, driverless buses. Now, in countries like Malaysia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, you will see when you go to the airport, from one terminal to another, you will have driverless trains. You get onto the train, it just goes because it's computer-driven. There are sensors that look at who's getting in, who's getting out, and the sensors will work with the automated system to operate them. But in a country like Sri Lanka, can we afford this? Can we afford this technology? Let's be frank about it. The budgets are required for more important things, food and agriculture. Then finally, my fifth challenge is the environmental concerns. We have to save the planet for the next generation. Are we all taking the responsibility in that? We have to think of net zero emission targets. If we are going to have net zero emission targets by 2030, then we need to have energy efficient manufacturing industry. Less pollution, carbon friendly, and better optimum energy use. Sri Lanka has made a climate promise to United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. By 2030, we are expected to reduce greenhouse gases emissions by 14.5%, and how we are going to achieve that is by increasing the forest cover by 32%. Is this realistic? Is this occurring? Is the community playing a role on this? Or is it just another statement by the government administrations? The ultimate aim in terms of transport infrastructure is to have safe road and rail infrastructure in this country with low carbon emission. And I have coined this word create in one of my last keynote papers in United Kingdom. And this create includes, in one word, this acronym, cost, reliability, energy, accessibility, technology, and the environment. So if we have to face the improvement of transport infrastructure, then there is one buzzword or an acronym, and that's create, that we need to look at. Now coming to more interesting parts of it, I will introduce you to some, with a pictorial illustration, some common problems affecting railways. Due to the purpose of brevity, I will not be able to go to the details of both roads, rail, and ports, and so on, but there are common aspects in all these transportation modes. If you look at the upper left-hand picture, that is a railway track which has been abandoned because the ballast or the rock aggregates that you see on a railway track, in Sri Lanka you just call it metal, but the correct word is ballast. The particles are crushed, they are pulverized to pieces because sometimes you may not use the high quality rock, sometimes the track may not have been constructed properly and the particles are overly impacted and you might get breakage. When the particles become smaller and smaller, the civil engineers who are here will know that the strength of the track rapidly decreases. On the upper middle picture, you will see significant erosion of the substructure materials, the construction materials below a railway track because of high rainfall and subsequent flooding and the receding waves that have washed out the foundation of the railway track. So you get sudden settlement. Unfortunately, the train drivers are not going to go and look underneath a railway track. That's not their job. But the point is, if a rail train starts going on a track like that, you are sure to get derailment. On the right-hand upper picture, you will see the phenomenon of mud pumping. In civil engineering, this term is called soil fluidization. How does this happen? In countries where the rainfall is significant, where flooding is the norm than the exception, the soil is always saturated, fully saturated. The water has nowhere to go. When the water content of the soil exceeds a certain amount, the soil becomes a slurry, a fluid. Well, think of an analogy, creme brulee. You got a crust at the top, nothing really hard underneath that. So this soil will pump up when the pressure becomes very high because water has nowhere to go, drainage is poor. Even if the drains have been provided, they may be clogged, they may not have been maintained by the councils, and the mud will pump to the top and essentially clog the ballast or the rock particles. So it's like lubricating the particles. The whole idea why we have particles, rock aggregates on a railway track, is because in the early days, 200 to 300 years ago, engineers and scientists realized that the rock particles compacted together gives an extremely high strength. But if these rock particles get covered by mud, slurry, then the friction of these particles will be undermined. And then the strength will be compromised, and the trains cannot operate. If you look at the bottom left-hand picture, you will see rail buckling, steel buckling. Just imagine you suddenly go on a railway track, and suddenly the driver can't brake, even if he can see the steel buckle, because the steel wheels and the steel rails, the friction is very little. Unlike a rubber tire car on an asphaltic road, you can't suddenly brake on a railway. It will go for a kilometer before it actually stops. You are bound to get derailment. Now in that picture, if you look at the adjoining track, that is perfect. Now why did this happen? The track that is perfect was maintained a few months ago. But the track that is buckled was going to be maintained in the near future. Just a bit too late. There was a very hot day. The particles or the ballast, the track was not maintained. The particles were crushed to smaller sizes. There was not enough confining pressure, not enough confinement provided to the railway tracks to hold the sleepers together. Sleepers are the concrete beams that you see under the steel rails. And if they start moving, because there is not enough rock to keep it together, then the steel rails will buckle, even if the temperature exceeds, say, 25 to 30 degrees. In the picture which is at the middle here, then you will have settlement because of combination of all these problems. And on the right-hand bottom picture, you simply have a picture of poor drainage, and the track gets abandoned because if the water is seeping underneath the railway track, then the track will work like a sponge, and the train drivers know that, they will refuse to go. Now I'm coming to the most important section on safety and reliability and the possibility of track derailment. In my view, train derailment is a persistent concern in Sri Lanka. And my immediate observation tells me, every time I look at a railway track in Sri Lanka, that there is insufficient ballast on the track to provide its strength. I won't go to the detail, but you can find these reports in Daily Mirror and so on, and you can see the trains derailed. But the most important thing is, if you were to look at the bottom two pictures, when the train starts to derail, there's extremely high impact forces that are applied on the concrete sleepers or the timber sleepers, and they practically get crushed. Now, that really shouldn't happen if there had been enough ballast packed on that track. If you look at the picture on the right-hand bottom, you can see grass growing on a railway track. If the track has been maintained, how do you get grass in a railway track? There should be rock particles. Grass will not grow on rock particles. Grass will only grow if there is soil and water. But in the absence of a sufficient thickness of rock aggregates, your sleepers are sitting on soil, wet soil, soft soil, absolutely weak, waiting for failure to happen, waiting for a derailment to happen. In 2021, there were 111 reported derailments in Sri Lanka. In 2022, 117. The first half of 2023, this year, 54. Make it 54 plus 1, because last week I heard on the TV there was a derailment in Rambukkana. Sri Lanka has also come out with a new mechanism of derailment, hitting elephants that are crossing the railway tracks. You can see the very sad picture on the upper corner of the picture. There is a solution to this. Countries in Africa and India have done all kinds of solutions, and they have found that elephants are lazy to climb up. They like to cross very leveled areas. So if you were to elevate a railway embankment to a certain height and then make a passage for the elephants to cross, they are very intelligent animals. They will take the lower path, and the trains can slow down if it has to go uphill before coming to that pass. So you can actually train the elephants also with sensors, ultrasound sensors of certain frequencies. When the train is coming at a distance, you can have a sensor operating with an ultrasound noise that will prevent the elephants crossing that path and go away from the area. So all these solutions are there, but they have to be administered properly, managed, and engineers and the community should work together to make these things happen. Coming to maintenance, construction, and safety and reliability. If you look at the pictures that I have, on my left-hand side are pictures from Sri Lanka, and on the right-hand side I have some pictures from Australia and North America. Sri Lanka is a landslide-prone country. If you are going to watch news after a very heavy rainfall, you'll always see in the news a landslide somewhere or the other. There are a lot of railway tracks, a lot of roads in hilly countries, winding roads which are built on hills. They need to be protected. You can see that insert picture, Khoslam, the landslide which occurred on the 8th of October, 2002. And I was a UND expert at the time, helping the NBRO to mitigate and to come up with remedial measures for this landslide. Khoslam, the landslide, is still in history reported as the 5th largest landslide ever to have occurred in the world. It's a massive landslide. So these kind of landslides will take all your infrastructure out, not just roads and railways, including schools and so on. In the right-hand middle picture, you see a packed train in Galle. So many kids, young kids, hanging on to the footboards of these trains in order to find their way home. Of course, there is one child on the platform thinking, should I get onto this train? I hope that this child ended up as an engineer who is working for this country now. If you look at the bottom left picture here, you can see the traffic congestion in Colombo. Urban traffic congestion is something that we all know about. The loss of productivity, school children getting late to school, people getting late to work. All that lost hours is lost in productivity. We need to do something about it. As I said earlier, more people using public transport. If trains operate well, there is no traffic congestion on railway tracks. The central picture at the bottom is the Kandy railway station, and you will see grass growing on the railway track, and you don't see any ballast. Where is the ballast? What has happened to the ballast? That track has not been maintained. So engineers who work in this area of transport can immediately say what has been maintained and what has not been maintained. There is no point in doing fantastic design and sustainable construction if this infrastructure is not maintained regularly. On the right-hand side, at the extreme end, Australia's got the world's longest train. The Guinness Book of Record will tell you that the iron ore train in Western Australia is 7 kilometers long. In fact, if you get stuck on a boom gate, you can put your car off and read the newspaper because you'll have to wait for a few minutes before the train passes. Australia's got one of the longest passenger trains, the Ghan, that goes all the way from the southern city of Adelaide to all the way to the northern city of Darwin, 2,800 kilometers. These trains don't get derailed. I've never heard of them. The tracks are maintained. You can see from the picture itself, the rock particles, the gray color comes from rock particles. They're always packed, regular maintenance. So my message here is that we have certain budgets. We have to do the best design that we can manage within the resources that are provided for the engineering community and the designers, but still safety can never be compromised. I would not like to hear anyone saying that, well, we can't maintain safety because the budget is not enough. We are dealing with human lives. Safety is of paramount importance. We might be able to compromise a little bit on comfort, yes. Everything can't be air-conditioned, but safety has to be maintained. Now coming to one of the other points I made in the challenges Sri Lanka has, how do we actually use the waste materials in track construction? These are rubber tires that you can see being dumped in general everywhere in many countries. Even in Australia, very, very small amount of rubber tires have been used in practice. Most of them are still dumped. Only a very small percentage is recycled as rethreaded tires. But now that situation is improving. And Sri Lanka is no different because a lot of rubber tires are discarded annually in Sri Lanka. So can we do something about it? Here is an example, which is now a patented technology. Rubber tires being put together to form a foundation for railway tracks. Before we could convince the railway engineers in Australia to adopt these wonderful research outcomes, we had to convince them to reduce the risk by saying, well, these have been tested on a one-to-one scale, a prototype scale in the laboratory, and make sure that the concept works and the design works. So here you can see one of my PhD students working on a model railway track, a one-to-one scale. She's actually in that picture putting some instruments on the ground to look at the pressures that are propagated from the train to the soil. And then the rubber tires are assembled, and then each tire is instrumented to measure the stresses, the strains, the forces, and the displacements that are taken in that. And then this assembly is put on to this massive testing unit, which is just like another train, and whatever the load that is imparted in real life can be 100% simulated in this particular equipment as well. So this equipment was originally designed by me about 10 years ago, and then it was built by Australian companies. Now, I have a little problem here because in order to run this, I need to get the cursor back. And can I please ask for the technician who is here to come and give me a hand here? Because the system has been changed a little. So I have to get the play button, and because it's gone to the laser mode, I need to get the cursor to run the videos. I apologize for that, something that I didn't notice before. Partially my fault for not giving them the correct advice and instructions before. Until this is sorted out, you can see this equipment. So the large loading units that you see in blue color, they are the actuators, and they apply exactly the same load as a freight train going at, say, 100 kilometers per hour in this particular case. You have to get the arrow, you have to get the cursor to run it. Let's go back here and get the cursor. All right. So you can now hear the sound. This is a railway track. You can't see the rubber tires because the rubber tires are underneath the ballast, okay? So you can only see on the surface the aggregates or the rock aggregates, the ballast, but underneath the ballast are the rubber tires which are infilled with waste materials, and that was the equipment that actually test out, and all the response of the track under this load is measured, and then you can check your design and get the new data. So as I said, evidence is the data, and that is the data that you require to convince the practicing engineers to build the tracks and adopt these techniques. And that's exactly what I've managed to do. As I said, this is a patent already. And you can see the rubber tires being brought to Western Sydney to a site called Chullora, which is not too far away from Sydney to the west. And you can see the rubber tires being brought and put together in a kind of a honeycomb pattern. And then waste rock materials, which have been discarded in maintenance sites, have been brought back to the site. And this discarded or spent ballast, if you like, is brought back, and the tires get filled with this material. And then you can see on the right-hand bottom picture, the material is this compacted. So once it is compacted, then you can now build the railway track or a road, if you like, on top of that compacted material. Now, I have an analogy here so that you understand exactly why we do that. Rubber is a compressible material compared to steel, concrete, and rock. Compressible materials means that that material can absorb energy. Now think of a shock absorber in your car. What happens if the shock absorber is not working? You will feel some discomfort, there will be vibration, there will be noise. The car will be jumping up and down. The shock absorbers do exactly the same thing as this rubber tire assembly. Shock absorbers will absorb the shock or the impact. That's why you call them shock absorbers. So this system is a shock absorber system introduced to the railways for the very first time in the world. This particular technique has won so many awards. It's been tried out now in countries like India and China, and I hope that Sri Lanka will adopt this very soon because it's based on waste materials. And if we can get kilometers of railways and roads based on this technique, not only you are helping the environment, but of course, you are going to have a sustainable infrastructure in the future. Now, this is another video that I would like to play. And again, I seem to be having the same problem, but anyway, let me try with this here. So you can see the track being constructed. You can see the rubber tires being filled with recycled ballast. And so that is a track that was built in Chullora. It's quite long. And the entire system works on instruments that are powered by solar. So there is all renewable energy. There is no extra power that is there. And everything comes from the solar energy for this particular track. Roads can be made the same way. This is a low-lying floodplain. Horrendous amount of rainfall every year. This is in the border of Queensland and New South Wales, a town called Ballina, a floodplain where we had to make access roads for our experimental site. And we tried this system. You can see the rubber tires being brought in, filled with discarded material. And at the last picture, you can see a well-compacted foundation on which you can now put asphalt and make a highway on it, or you put concrete sleepers and steel rails and make the railway track. So the idea is that this technique you can use for both roads and rail. It's a shock absorber for your roads and railways that increases the longevity of the infrastructure. So what are the materials in Sri Lanka that you can use to fill these off-the-road tires? Glass bottles. They can be crushed to pieces, small pieces, and glass is very strong. Glass can be compacted in these rubber tires. Then you have discarded ballast from the old railway sites. They get stockpiled somewhere because they have been removed from repaired tracks, and concrete industry uses them, but you can also use this for the rubber tires. Then you can use material from demolished yards, bricks, concrete aggregates from demolished buildings. You can crush them to smaller sizes, use them to fill the rubber tires. And then the rubber itself. The rubber tires themselves can be crammed or shredded into pieces. And that's the new technology that is being used. And at this stage, I acknowledge one of my top Sri Lankan students, Dr. Chathuri Arachige, who's now a research fellow working with me at the Transport Research Center. Chathuri's PhD work was absolutely cutting edge. She came out with this technique called RIBS, rubber intermixed ballast stratum, where the railway ballast itself is mixed with rubber particles which have exactly the same shape. So you randomly make rubber which is coming from recycled rubber, mixed together with rock particles, and then you put them onto a railway track. And Chathuri has shown how noise and vibration can be totally eliminated when you have this kind of mix. So going back to the next one, you will see from the first one, it's a conventional noisy railway track simulation. You can see there the particles, the rock particles colored in red, and then you can see the concrete sleeper, and then top of that is the steel rail, and the load is applied by this dynamic actuator, which mimics a heavy haul or a freight train, which is very heavy, going at about 100 kilometers per hour. Now, I will run this, and you can listen to the noise and observe the vibration that goes on when this works. You can see the vibration, you can see the ballast particles shaking, the entire system is shaking. Now that is equivalent to a poorly made railway track. Now when you mixed rubber particles with this ballast, about 10 to 15%, the rubber particles absorb the energy. As a result, it protects the energy dispersion to the rest of the structure. And if there's less energy propagated to the rest of the track, then you'll get less noise and vibration. So you can run this one. You can see how smooth, not even a single ballast particle is vibrating, not even one. It's exactly the same railway track, same materials. Only difference is 10% rubber being mixed with ballast. This is not a rocket science. Anybody can do that. I'm surprised that people didn't think of this before. And as Mudita said, I'm collecting all these awards. Somebody else should have done this long time ago. With simple technology and common sense. So this is Sydney Trains, the biggest railway organization in Sydney that is using this technique with Chaturi's PhD work. And Chaturi and I supervise this work in the real railway track. You can see the rubber crumbs being brought in large bags and then mixing the rubber crumbs with the rock particles in the middle picture. And then a geotextile cloth is actually put on the track in order to dissipate water pressures in the case of heavy rainfall. So that geotextile or the cloth that is put on there is only to reduce the water pressures. That's a very important part of railway track construction. I know that in Sri Lanka this is not done. This is done in roads, but not so much in railways, but you need to do this in railways as well. And then you can see the bottom part, you can see the ballast being put in, and then you can see the concrete sleepers being laid, and then finally you can see the completed track, and you can see far away a train is actually coming on this track. So this is not just fictitious image here, this is real life railways. So that's a completed ballast track. And I put that 300 millimeters. I remembered it this morning to put that arrow and say 300 millimeters. And I would ask kindly any civil engineers here who are working for roads and traffic authorities and railways, just to make sure that the correct depth of ballast is put on our railway tracks. 300 millimeters is the minimum that you really need in order to have high quality railway tracks. Now coming to another important project. In Australia, we have a lot of rubber conveyor belts being discarded by mining companies. Conveyor belts in minerals processing plants, conveyor belts in cement factories. There are kilometers and kilometers of rolls of these conveyor belts being discarded. We bring them to UTS lab and we make apertures on them. And these apertures are made by water jet cutting. And what do these apertures do in these grids? These grids are put before you put the ballast. When you put the ballast on a grid like this, the apertures will hold them in place. When you hold the particles in place without them moving around, then the strength of the railway track is increased multiple times. Very simple, discarded rubber sheets being put as grids. Now in this one, I will show you how at UTS laboratory in the Transport Research Center, how the water jet cutting is used to make these holes in these rubber sheets. This is extremely high water pressure. This water pressure can even make holes on steel. So the water pressures are very large. I Googled today to find out whether there are water jet cutting factories in Sri Lanka. I found 11. And I asked Mr. Mudita Indraratna, and he said, yes, it's well known. We have sufficient number of water jet cutting machines in this country. So why not take discarded rubber sheets, make apertures, and use them for railway tracks? And this is done again in Sydney by Sydney trains, you can see very large impact forces that are generated in a typical railway track. Now, when you go on a train, have a look at the wheels of a train. To the naked eye, you think they are perfectly cylindrical. Actually, they are not. They are just like anything else. There is wear and tear with time. So you can get corrugation on the steel rails, as you can see from the picture. And also your rails are never perfectly smooth. There is that waviness, the corrugation. So when you have that roughness and a train tries to travel at a very fast speed, then you get the hammer effect. That's impact. That is the impact that damages the steel rails, the ballast, the concrete sleepers. So if you can have an shock-absorbing system that can take that impact force and reduce the consequence of the impact forces, then the longevity of your track is obviously enhanced. And that's what you see there. You can see the rubber grids being made, brought to the site. You can see here the rubber grids being laid by the Sydney train's technical crew. Then the ballast is put on these grids, and then the real train is actually crossing, going back and forth. This is the first run, just to make sure, before passenger trains operate, just to make sure that the track is working very well. And indeed, it worked very well. Otherwise, I won't be showing these pictures to you. Now, I'm coming back to something that you all know on roads, potholes. Tell me a single road in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, in recent times that you did not have potholes. There are many potholes in Sri Lanka. But do you always blame the engineers and the contractors for this? You should not. And I'll tell you why we have potholes in Sri Lanka. It's the same in Australia, in the coastal areas. If the soil, the foundation soil is very soft, it's compressible, saturated with water because there is so much rainfall, and close to the ocean, you have the seepage, you have the high tide at night, water will come towards the land and saturate the soil. So as I said earlier, the analogy is a creme brulee. You have the asphalt layer, which looks stiff and looks strong, but underneath that asphalt layer, you have a soil which is so wet and saturated, waiting to fluidize, waiting to become a slurry. And you exceed that threshold load either by heavy trucks, then or lot of traffic, then you will get collapse, and we call them potholes. So this is not really a problem just for the people who are doing the asphalt on the top. It is also a problem for geotechnical engineers to improve the ground before you do the infrastructure. So this is something that people haven't appreciated, and this is something that can be easily be corrected. There is no point spending a lot of money on high-quality asphalt if the ground below that has not been improved. And if the drainage has not been improved, then the waterlogging conditions will eternally create potholes, and you will never find a solution. Same thing happens on railways. I took this picture a few days ago on the 19th of November, the day after I came here. I could see from my hotel window from the top floor, there is a massive mud hole in the Kolpiti railway station, very close to Kolpiti railway station. You can see these pictures, and you can see where I have circled in red. I could see that from my window, and you can see the enlargement of that which I've taken from my telescopic lens. You can see the water. You can see how wet the ground is. And on the left-hand side, there was a passenger train crossing it. It's okay because this is approaching the station. The train has slowed down. The train was going at snail pace, so there is no derailment. Imagine that mud hole forming when the train is going at 60 to 80 kilometers per hour. You would have got derailment because the sleepers are hanging. There is nothing under the sleepers. The sleepers will go down as soon as the train crosses. And if the speed exceeds a certain speed, you would have got derailment. And here is a computer simulation, how you can see these mud holes forming on a railway track. This is a very simple simulation that one of my PhD students created for me, just to show you all. You will see the wheels traveling from left to right and I'm only showing one rail on a railway track. So if I run this, you will see the wheels from the track coming, and where you suddenly get that dark blue, that is where the track settles and you get the mud hole. So you can do a computer simulation. If you know the properties of the ground and you put this into the computer program, you can actually predict the locations that need to be maintained before you get this. So what are the reasons? Well, Sri Lanka is quite similar to some parts of Australia. We get a lot of rainfall. You can see on the left-hand side, flooding in Australian cities. This is close to cities like Brisbane, Wollongong. You get flooding. You can see the trucks going on flooded road. You can see towns that are flooded. That's South Australia at the top. You can see New South Wales, Hunter Valley area, a railway practically flooded. But you will not operate a train on that. That will be an absolute mistake. And then there's a picture, bottom, severe flooding in Sri Lanka, which I've taken and showing you. That's the road. People are going on a road, but the road is totally flooded. Now, don't be alarmed by what I'm going to show you next. This is absolute severe track damage in various parts of Australia because of very heavy flooding. It's not just the flood waters itself that cause the damage. It's the receding waves. When it's flooded, you get several meters of water, and the water has to suddenly go at ferocious speeds, drag in the construction materials with it. Now just imagine if you have not maintained your railway track, your particles, the ballast particles, have become 1/3 of the size. They will get washed out very easily. But if the railways have been maintained properly and the particles are still large, you take a lot more seepage forces before these particles can wash out. You can see that even the very well-made railway tracks, you can see the amount of ballast, like the corner bottom picture there. There's plenty of ballast. But the track is gone on to one side, inclined to one side, because the water is going from one side to another. You are losing material on one side, so the track will actually tilt to one side. On the upper picture there, you can see erosion of the soil and the construction material, and the track is actually settled. Well, compared to what happened 2 months ago in Sri Lanka, a train in Rambukkana going on a flooded track. Let's play this. Have you seen this before? This is a train going on a flooded track, and the train driver can't see anything on the track. There are passengers in this train. This is not a freight train with one driver. This is a long passenger train. So the derailment can easily occur if you cannot see the track. This kind of breach of safety is not acceptable in any community. So here is just another slide of in New South Wales, close to where I live. You can see the problems of liquefied mud coming to the top of the railway track. And what I'm going to show you next is a computer simulation to show you how the mud liquefies and comes to the top. In the left-hand side picture, you will see the soil here, but the pressure is not large enough for the soil to come to the top of the ballast. So you can see the soil fluidizing, but the pressure, the water pressure underneath the track is not large enough to bring this soil to the top. But in the next picture, the hydraulic or the water pressure is very large because the water is not drained properly. So the pressure starts accumulating, and here the soil will become a slurry and pump to the top. So that's mud pumping. The advantage of the second picture is because the driver can see the mud at a distance and try to slow down the train, at least warn the control office not to send a passenger train on this track. The problem with the left-hand side picture is it's like a sponge. The driver will go over it, and if the train is crowded, if the weight is too large, that track will suddenly sink and you can get derailment because you can't see the mud on the top. It's a subsurface problem. The equipment on the right was designed by myself and a PhD student, Dr. Joseph Aravilagan, who has finished his PhD last year, and currently another Sri Lankan student, Shashikata Pattu, working on this equipment. This is the only equipment of its kind in the world that can simulate the problem of mud pumping. Computer simulations, a lot of people can do, but that equipment that you see is the first of its kind that actually shows this work. So this work has been applied in New South Wales on various tracks, and I'm showing this particular slide because this is after extremely heavy rainfall in Sydney, where we were asked to make this track. You can see the excavated clay on the upper left-hand picture. You can see how wet the clay is. And every time you have heavy rainfall, water will find its way to the low-lying area. So the extra water has to be pumped out before you start putting construction materials. It's an absolutely essential thing to do that, to get rid of the extra water. Then a geotextile drainage layer will need to be put on the right-hand upper picture to make sure that the water pressures will dissipate when the track is being constructed. You can see, in addition to that, another drainage layer with granular materials, and this is waste materials. You can make a drainage layer with granular waste material. Even crushed glass can be put as a drainage layer before you actually start making the track. And you can see on the right-hand side end, the finished train, and the train is actually traveling on it. So this is no different to Sri Lanka. This method can easily be adopted in Sri Lanka. Only thing you need to do is to make sure that the fluidization problem is prevented by doing the right thing, pumping the water out, a drainage geotextiles. You reduce the water pressures, then you reduce the risk of the soil becoming a liquid. Now I'm coming to the last part of ecologically friendly environment aspects, which is the last part of my 5 conditions, which I've explained. Growing trees to stabilize railways and roads. We call this concept the green corridors. It's a bioengineering principle. What do tree roots do? Tree roots, the analogy is reinforcement in concrete slabs. Would you ever put a concrete slab in a house without steel reinforcements? You won't, because steel reinforcements are necessary to prevent the slab cracking in tension. In the same way, the tree roots will act like reinforcement for the soil. In addition to that, we have the transpiration phenomenon. During the morning and afternoon, the canopy of your trees will put out the moisture into the atmosphere and then suck the water from the roots. And this creates what we call the osmotic suction. It's a huge pressure that is created by suction by this evapotranspiration. Evaporation and transpiration, this cycle continues. And if you have enough trees on either side of a road or either side of a railway, then that extra moisture from the soil is naturally taken out without having to laying any geotextile drainage layers or without having to do anything. It's a natural way of reducing the water pressures and getting rid of excess water. Now I will draw your attention to the tsunami. In January 2005, I was invited by the Sri Lankan government from the Prime Minister's office at the time. I had several phone calls. Can you come and help to rehabilitate some of the railway tracks? So I came very quickly. I was there in Sri Lanka for about 10 to 12 weeks. And this is the village very close to Hikkaduwa, where the train was hit by the tidal waves. And you can see the location of this train and what had happened. I don't have to explain. It's quite obvious. I took a test pit where you see that white circle. The Agrarian Research Institute people in Gaul, they helped me. The University of Moratuwa Vice Chancellor provided final year students and some academics to help me. We formed a crew very quickly. And my first thing was to do a test pit. I wanted to see what has happened to the soil after the tsunami. Up to 500 millimeters this is all marine mud that has come from the ocean. There was no sand. You had to dig about 500 millimeters, half a meter before you can hit the sand. So the soil was extremely soft. I was under a little bit of pressure from the transport minister at the time and said, Buddhima, can you get this railway track done very quickly? My answer is no. You can't just go and put a track on a soil that has no strength. This is marine mud. The mud has to be compacted. It has to be strengthened. And you can see we ran out of ballast. Ballast has got all washed out. The factories were not operated. Families were dispersed. There was nobody to help us. So we had to collect the washed out ballast from the areas, whatever we can, and try to improvise a primitive railway track with exposed sleepers. You can see there is hardly any ballast. The sleepers are exposed. So my advice was trains can operate, but they can only go at 30 kilometers per hour. Okay, the drivers oversped a little. They went at 40. Nothing happened. It took time to make this track. If you do the instruments properly, and then you do what we call a cone penetration test, some of the civil engineers here, I can see Professor Atula Kulatilaka sitting at the back. They know what this is. This is simply a cone that is put into the ground, pushed into the ground, and if you can look at the resistance of how quickly you can push this cone into the ground, that represents the strength of the soil. And while I was doing, the funny thing was, an old man came to me and asked me in Sinhalese what I was doing, and I explained to him. He said, why do you want to do that? He just shoved his walking stick into the ground and said, I can do it with my walking stick. So that's how soft the soil was. So you can see me doing there. That's a cone penetration test with some of the crew around me. And you can see from the top picture here, there is zero strength up to about 1 meter. Up to about 1 meter, there was no strength. So the ground had to be completely improved in this area before the railway track could be rehabilitated. Now, something I need to look at is this picture. What do you see? Concrete piles, concrete slabs, foundations of hotels. Absolute disaster, broken into pieces like children's Lego. What about the coconut trees? Can you see a single tree that has fallen? Not even one. How come you get 12 to 13 meter high tidal waves and the concrete foundations are completely destroyed, but not even a single coconut tree? This reinforcement from the roots and the very high suction from the tree roots. The roots keep the soil together. So you need more than a tsunami to uproot those. So that's why the trees are standing up. So on the bottom picture is my advice at the time. This is the technical report presented to the Ministry of Transport and Highway and to the NBRO at the time in 2005. You can see my first thing was not to take out the mangroves, the Vaticaea plants. That's the worst thing you do. Vaticaea plants have fantastic root system. They spread out a lot and they are very strong and they go fairly deep. They are the first defense of any tidal waves, not just tsunami. Then you need a protective band made with soil. So you can see the protective band, and that gives the extra protection to the railway and the highway adjoining that. And then you have the dwellings, and then you have another tree line of coconut trees or other trees, and then the dwellings, and the front of the dwellings have to have properly made structural concrete walls. And this will minimize in the future the damage from tsunami, even if they do occur. Now, at this stage, I will just peripherally go in a tangent for a little while. Sri Lanka recently had a tremor. There was an earthquake tremor recorded. Now, this is going to happen again and again because if you remember why the tsunami occurred, there was tectonic plate movement. Tectonic plate movement means that there are cracks in the Indian Ocean. Tsunamis can occur, and when there are cracks, little bit of movement can actually trigger off a landslide with epicenters from the ocean. So we cannot discard the fact. We cannot go on saying the rest of the world, Sri Lanka is not going to have earthquakes anymore. This might happen. So we need to take precautions. From now onwards, the engineers have to be mindful that tall buildings, towers, skyscrapers they will need to be designed for earthquake resistance. For civil engineers who are here, minimum 0.2 G. So this technique of bioengineering and the growth of native vegetation has been tested out in the laboratory. And PhD work of several of my students, Dr. Bezat Fatahi, Dr. Mudita Pallewatta, and Dr. Pubudu Jayatilaka, two Sri Lankans. Dr. Mudita Pallewatta was a University of Moratuwa lecturer. Before that, she was at the irrigation department. And Dr. Pubudu Jayatilaka is working for industry in Australia. Their PhD work was actually growing these plants from the time they are really tiny plants, actually growing them inside testing apparatus, and then shearing them to find out the strength of the roots. And you can see Dr. Pallewatta's test site, which is in Wollongong, near a car park. You can see the instruments being put into the soil so you can measure the pressure, the suction pressure from the gum trees. Gum trees are extremely strong, and it's a native plant in Australia, so we promote gum trees. In the middle picture here, you can see my former PhD student, Dr. Bezat Fatahi, looking at a tree, and that's a solitary tree, because what railways do is the same everywhere. Every time you want to make a railway track, what is the first thing the contractors do? Cut all the trees. Clear the area before you make the railway track. We had to practically plead with the railway authorities just to leave one tree without cutting it so that we could finish our field work. We cut a 3-meter deep trench. The soil doesn't even move in because the tree roots, you can see the tree trunk there, has strengthened the soil to the extent that you can even make a 3-meter deep hole without it falling apart. And that's the strength that these tree roots can provide. So there is a computer simulation, which I first did this in 2006. And it was a very highly cited paper at the time because this shows the concept of green corridors. Why not grow trees on either side of railway tracks? And the tree roots that you can see from either side is sucking the moisture out. And you can see from those contours, they are very dark blue, means there's a lot of water. And then away from that, the water is draining. And there is no artificial drainage here. There are no culverts or there are no deep drains artificially put in there. The water is taken out below the railway track from the trees. And a computer simulation could be done, that you can see from the top figure, and that shows how we can plan and design green corridors from the computer using the correct theory. And this work was then later extended by Dr. Mudita Pallewatta. When she joined University of Moratuwa, she got some of her students to do this in consultation with me, and University of Moratuwa developed some very nice work, how to do plantations, how to do native vegetations in unstable areas. So applications on the left-hand side, you can see an unpaved road in Canada, where the trees grown on either side, you don't even need asphalt. The road is so strong because of the tree root suction on either side of this unpaved road. That's another road below in Canada, an asphalted motorway. You can see the trees on either side stabilizing. And it is wonderful to see that in the Southern Transport Development Project here, you can see that the slopes are stabilized with this native vegetation. You can see that on the right-hand side. So I'm very happy that this concept is being used. Coming to the last part of my presentation, if I don't talk about port cities, I don't think my presentation will be complete. Transport infrastructure is not just about roads and railways, it also includes ports and airports. Why do we need port reclamation? Well, we need space. That's the reason. If you don't need space, don't spend billions of dollars trying to reclaim land from the ocean. How do we do that? Well, the commonest way of doing that is you put a boundary wall, which we call breakwater, large boulders. We define the boundary. Then barges will go to the ocean, dredge the sand and the mud from the ocean, and pump it to within that boundary, and then compact it once it's filled up to a reasonable amount. The environmental damage is humongous. You have to understand, you are dredging the ocean. The aquatic habitats will be affected. These are irreparable damages to aquaculture. But priorities are priorities. If you need the port, you need to do that. But I'll come to some alternatives later. What is the challenge? The challenge is the mud that is taken out of the ocean with the sand is very soft when it is pumped onto the reclaimed area. So the challenge is to strengthen it and make sure that you can actually build the infrastructure you want on that compacted ground. If you don't achieve that, then these buildings will settle over time and there'll be a lot of damages. So you can see how Colombo Port City is being done. You can see the sand that is being, the dredge sand which is being pumped onto the reclaimed area. And then you can see that big 5 or 10-ton hammer being dropped from a crane, and we call this method dynamic compaction. You drop a hammer, very heavy hammer, from a fairly big distance from the crane, and you keep on hitting the ground with that in a very systematic manner and compact the ground. So that's what you see in this particular part. You can see the boundary of the area far away, which is like a breakwater, and that's the boundary. So this sand will have to be filled within that boundary before you can compact it. Coming to Port of Brisbane, where I was a consultant to this major project. This is the biggest port project that Australia has ever undertaken, and I was asked to assess the ground improvement techniques and to make recommendations, the optimum ways of doing it. In addition to compacting the dredge sand and mud, like you see in Colombo Port, it was suggested that we drive vertical drains into the ground. These vertical drains are like strips, like pile driving. You can drive them even up to 15 to 20 meters deep into the ground because you have soft soil in this area. And by driving these deep drains into the ground, you will reduce the ground water pressures while the infrastructure is being built. Now that's an added ground improvement apart from the compaction. And you can see on the right-hand upper corner, if you don't improve the ground, you can see what's happening to the machinery. Even the machinery will sink. So you can see the dredged area, you can see the soil, and the ground has to be stabilized before the heavy equipment can be brought in to make the infrastructure. So, and then the fourth picture, you can see the completed one. In order to accelerate the dissipation of this water pressure, you can connect these drains to a vacuum pump, as you can see here. So the vacuum hoses can be connected to these drains just like you drink Coca-Cola from a straw. You are practically doing the same thing. The extra water will get into the drains because you are sucking it out with a vacuum pressure. That will accelerate the settlement of the soil and make it stronger in no time. Both Colombo Port and Port of Brisbane is dredged from the ocean, and the environment impact is substantial. What if you use waste materials? Now this is the harbour, outer harbour in Wollongong. We call it Port Kembla. I was asked to come up with a way of using waste materials to reclaim the land without having to dredge the ocean. In Wollongong area, which is the south coast of New South Wales, if you were to dig the ocean will become very acidic because there is something called pyrite or ferrous sulfide, very shallow areas, and that ferrous sulfide will quickly oxidize to produce sulfuric acid. We don't want that. Thousands of fish will die if that happens. So we couldn't dredge the ocean in Wollongong area. But we have a lot of coal mines. We have steel industry, lot of waste materials which are granular materials. Coal wash comes from the coal mines. Steel slag comes from steel industry. We mix these granular materials, compact them, put them onto the areas where we want to reclaim, compact it, as you can see on the right-hand bottom picture, and that's reclaimed land. There is no dredging. So use of waste materials in order to make these ports viable. No environmental damage. In fact, it's an environmental contribution because you are not only making a sustainable port, you're also getting rid of huge amounts of waste coming from steel manufacturing and coal mining. I would like to end my presentation by acknowledging the OBA and the principal of Ananda College for hosting this Olcott Oration in 2023. I would like to thank all of you being here to commemorate the life and work of Colonel Henry Steele Olcott. My past and present PhD students and staff, as Mudita also correctly said, over 150, for their contributions over 3 decades. Approximately 25% of my PhD students and postdoctoral fellows have been Sri Lanka. They are doing extremely well. It's beside the point that if there are good incentives in this country, I'm sure some of them will come back. The Australian Research Council for assisting me with hefty research grants over the last 3 decades to make all this happen. Industry organizations for not only just speaking about this word and just appreciating it, but they have, through their own legislation, adopted these techniques and constitutionally approved the construction of roads and railways using waste materials and the new techniques that have become the consequential outputs of my R&D team, research and development team. My wife and family for their unwavering support. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation with one final wish to all of you. My gratitude to engineers who are here, who may adopt the concepts I have just explained for improving Sri Lanka's transport infrastructure. Buddhu Saranai.
Thank you very much, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, our orator for this evening, for that extensive deep dive into the advances in sustainable transportation infrastructure and how the advancement of science and technology has really influenced development in this field. Thank you very much, sir. May I now invite our principal, Mr. Lal Disanayake, to present a special token of gratitude, a memento for our chief guest and distinguished orator this evening, Professor Buddhima Indraratna. Thank you very much, Professor Indraratna, for accepting our invitation and being here with us this evening. It means a lot to us. Thank you, gentlemen. Please take your seats. I would also now like to invite our project chairman, Mr. Asanga Priyadarshana, to present our principal, our chief guest, Professor Indraratna, and the president of the Old Boys Association with the Ananda magazine. For those of you who might not be aware, the Ananda magazine is an update, is a collection of all updates pertaining to what happens inside Ananda College, and we'd like to present this to our chief guest, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, together with the principal, Mr. Lal Disanayake, and the president of the Old Boys Association. Thank you very much, gentlemen. The Ananda magazine captures everything pertaining to what happens inside school, and it's being released every 6 months. Ladies and gentlemen, you too can grab your copies on your way out. The Old Boys Association will be presenting these and having these laid out for you outside the lobby. As we come to an end of this year's Olcott Oration, may I now invite Project Chairman of Olcott Oration 2023, Mr. Asanga Priyadarshana, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you. Venerable Mahasangha, distinguished former Anandian and speaker this evening, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, Principal of Ananda College, Mr. Lal Disanayake, Executive President of Ananda College All Boys Association, Professor Kularatne, dignitaries and ladies and gentlemen. The Olcott Oration has been a significant event in Ananda College All Boys Association's calendar since its inception in 1908 under the leadership of first Sri Lankan principal of Ananda College, Sir D.B. Jayatilaka. This annual event has provided us with the opportunity to hear from distinguished Anandians and Anandian alumni who have shared their perspectives and knowledge on a wide range of important and national issues in honor of our founders and their beliefs. Professor Indraratna, this year was no different. Your oration has raised the bar of what we have come to expect from Olcott Oration to new heights. On behalf of Ananda College All Boys Association, I would like to express my sincere gratitude for accepting our invitation and delivering this year's oration and adding to its legacy. Organizing of an event of this nature requires detailed planning, execution, and collaboration of many people working together towards a common objective. On behalf of OB of Ananda College, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to the principal, Mr. Lal Disanayaka, for gracing this occasion and for invaluable guidance in organizing this event. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the following individuals and groups for their contribution for the success of the Oration 2023. Past principals, present and past teachers of the college, Executive President Professor Kularatne, past presidents and members of the Executive Committee of Ananda College All Boys Association, heads and members of media, presidents and members of affiliated groups of Ananda College All Boys Association, management and staff of OB Office, management and staff of School Development Society, and staff of Kularatne Hall. I would also like to acknowledge our generous financial donors. This event would not be possible without your support, and we appreciate your continued patronage. I would like to conclude my remarks by drawing on the words of illustrious physicist, mathematician, astronomer, and inventor Sir Isaac Newton, who said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." The giants who made this event a reality in 2023 are a team of highly motivated, dedicated professionals who make up the organizing committee. Thank you for your voluntary involvement and tireless effort to uphold the traditions of this event and for exceeding all expectations. It has been an honor to serve alongside you. Finally, it is you, the audience, that makes this event meaningful. Thank you very much for attending 2023 Olcott Oration. Without you, this event would have not been a success. I wish you a pleasant evening, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Priyadarshana. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much concludes the proceedings for Olcott Oration 2023. Once again, on behalf of the entire organizing committee, I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all those who made this evening possible. Also, a big thank you to our chief guest and dignified orator this evening, Professor Buddhima Indraratna, together with all of you for accepting our invitation and being here this evening. It truly means a lot to us. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to remind you that the Ananda magazine is laid out for you outside, and also we've got food and refreshments laid out for you at the ground floor of the Satmahala building. So do indulge. And once again, hoping to see you at the next year's Olcott Oration. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to become your host for one more year. It's been a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tilina Udayaratna, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Ananda